Hey friendo, Steve here. Welcome back to the channel. So as promised, I'm spending a couple videos taking a look at All Elite Wrestling. I did one a couple days ago when I looked at what they should do with CM Punk. I did one yesterday where I said, here's 5 things that I feel AEW could maybe lift inspiration from for the WWE. And today, I'm going to take a look at why you out there in the friendo Wrestle Juice world might not be into AEW. I thought it'd be interesting to put this comment thread out there and wow, on my community tab, we had 305 or 350 comments about people's gripes with AEW. The funny thing is, none of them there were not a lot that said you didn't actually like AEW. Most of the vast majority of these comments, it's very interesting, are all people saying, I really like AEW, but here's a couple of little things that I got an issue with maybe. It was not too dissimilar from the video I did yesterday, where I looked at things that AEW I think could improve on a little bit. I think the general consensus around here in Wrestle Juice land is we all really like AEW. But like any product, it's open for criticism, it's open for critique, and so we're going to take a look at some of that critique today and see where we land on that. I'll be honest with you. You know, I see some haters out there in the world, and they're all saying, AEW, whoa. But it's kind of cool that over here at Wrestle Juice, a lot of people are into the wrestling, and I like that. I think that's really neat. And by the way, I want to say this as well. On yesterday's video, 5 things AEW can learn from WWE, let's be honest. That title is a bit of a trollish title. It could potentially attract a certain toxicity element to the YouTube comments. And I was so damn impressed that the conversation going on in the YouTube comments here at Wrestle Juice was all very respectful and positive and sort of critique based, as opposed to a lot of the negativity that you might see out there in wrestling internet. And I was like, wow, that's really damn cool. So kudos to all you friendos out there for filling the YouTube comments with a lot of really cool, respectful, civil discourse. Who'd have thought we could have that in today's wrestling internet? So I really appreciate that. I really do. So before we get into these comments, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And if you haven't seen the community tab with these comments here, again, a lot of them are just really interesting critiques on AEW, and there's a really great discussion going on there. It's like 305 comments. It's crazy. So let's go ahead and dive into this real quick. It's funny because I honestly expected the criticism of AEW to be, like, I thought this was going to be filled up with people saying, it's just going to be another WCW, which is something I see on Twitter a lot. And I'm thinking to myself, I really like WCW. Like the last year or two was complete garbage because they brought in Vince Russo, and chances are he was sent there by WWE to ruin the company. Like, I don't actually believe that, but holy crap, that dude ran that company into the ground, creatively speaking. So it wouldn't shock me. No, I think WCW's problem had more to do with Hogan's giant contract, and then the fact that, the people at AOL didn't want wrestling anymore, and then they tanked them. So I thought that was going to be the thing. I thought that everybody would be like, the people who didn't like AEW would come out of the woodwork and be like, hey, it's because they're signing all these WWE guys. And like hardly anybody mentioned that in our comments. So it's kind of interesting that we have here at Wrestle Juice the type of, audience, I guess, the community that's like, no, you know what? AEW is all right by me. Let's just work on these little things here. And then I got a great idea in the comments for another video I'm going to do next week, which I probably should have thought of in the first place. Let's see here. First up from Wrestling God, he says, I love AEW, but they need to figure out how to properly mic wrestlers during backstage promos and packaging. I always need to turn up the volume for interviews. They do need to mix their audio a little bit better. There have been, and it's not all the time, it's not always, but there are certain characters like Malachi Black, for example, who, when he talks in his little room segments, in his room promos, speaking of audio issues here, let me get my mic situated. Sometimes he goes really low, and then sometimes he has a wide range in his audio volume, and I feel like they do need to, sort of vet that stuff a little bit, like quality check that a little bit more. It's a small nitpick, and they'll get to it, But yeah, I kind of agree with that. This is an interesting one from CKIDGF. Says, I like AEW. The fan base gives me headaches at times. And he says the fact most of them can't take valid criticism of the product. It was overhyped when it started. The true state of wrestling as a whole, true denial, blah, blah, blah. I understand that if you are interested in the discourse of professional wrestling as a fan, and you want to communicate within the confines of that discourse, and what you see is a lot of toxicity from a certain fan base, which you see it across every fan base there is, honestly. Like when we used to dog Impact Wrestling, we got not tons, but we had a couple, Impact Wrestling diehards who would give us a lot of shit. These days, I really love what Impact is doing. And even though we don't watch it on Twitch anymore, I still keep up with it. And so you got to learn, for what I would suggest in that situation is do what I've sort of done with my social media, is that I tend to not follow. I tend to sort of either mute or block out that element of conversation. And I don't really know how I've done it, but oftentimes I'll hear about the backlash to a certain thing before I'll actually witness it myself, if that makes sense. So it's just a matter of understanding who out there is leading these conversations, and are they doing it in a positive light, and try to filter out the negativity on social media. I know it's probably not easy to do, but I feel like that's something that sometimes you have to work out a little bit, because I feel like the toxicity is everywhere, not just with AEW fans, not just with WWE fans, but it's like everywhere. So, but it's a valid criticism. Sometimes the discourse, if you want to get into it, ends up being a little on the toxic side. Let's see here. Moving on from Hedgelin says, it's not that I don't like AEW, but for some reason I'm more critical of it than WWE. It might be because I want AEW to succeed. So when something doesn't look good, it really doesn't look good. That's an interesting philosophical, psychological thing, because a lot of people like this comment, and I kind of understand it. It's like, I really want AEW to succeed and do well. And so far it's doing really well. But like, and so maybe because of that, and because it's like, man, you have this opportunity, Tony Khan and EVPs, you've got this opportunity to do something really, really cool. Don't fuck it up, right? And so maybe that causes us to be a little bit more critical. An interesting comment. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it is. I totally understand it. Let's see here. Aaron McAdams has a very sound point, one that I talk about endlessly over on Going In Raw. Not endlessly, but I do point it out. He says, I legitimately love the essence of AEW, and week to week find myself captivated by certain elements. But, and it's a big but, their focus on the attaining on women and pushing them in a legit fashion is underwhelming to the point of offensive. I'll be honest. Sometimes when you come across an episode of Dynamite, they just put a women's match on there to put a women's match on there. I do get the feeling that that's one area that they have consistently sort of underplayed and undervalued, and that is a disappointment. And that is something that I think is a valid criticism of AEW, that they need to focus on a little bit more, is their women's division. I do feel like they're probably going to be turning a corner at some point in the future because of people. Hopefully Ruby Soho will be coming over. Maybe they'll do some more cross promotion with like Impact. Maybe bring Deonna Purrazzo for some sort of series with somebody. They did recently actually sign Thunder Rosa to their product. So maybe with the third hour of Rampage, they'll find more time in their schedule to devote to the women's division, because that's been sort of the thing that Tony Khan has or I think Tony said in the past. So there's not enough or Cody said it. There's not enough time. Well, you have to make time. You have to sketch out time for that. And yeah, that is something I'd like for them to focus on a lot more. I think with Britt Baker being as great as she is, I think that they need to focus the spotlight on a couple other talents to sort of elevate them to the point where it's like, yeah, okay, I can see any of these people coming after Britt Baker and honestly giving her a good run for her money. The women's division is definitely a weakness in AEW. And I hope that that's something that we see improve drastically over the next 6 to 12 months. Let's see here. Project CMR says the way they go match to match to match to match without letting certain moments have the time they need. He mentions the end of the SCU match as well. I mentioned that on the video I did yesterday, not explaining why Scorpio wasn't with them anymore, and especially not giving the story the TV time it should have had. He says he could also do without JR's commentary these days. Actually, quite a few of these comments mentioned JR's commentary, and it's I'm still okay with JR's commentary. I think that having him in there, there's something very comforting about JR's voice. As somebody who grew up, who watched Attitude Era WWE, that was like sort of my first exposure to WWE was Attitude Era stuff. It's when I really first got into it. There is something very comforting about JR, but I could also understand if people came around maybe post JR WWF, they'd probably think to themselves, why is this guy still on commentary? Like, I don't really get it, which I totally understand. I don't know how much longer they plan on keeping JR around, if there's a plan for his exit at any point. But yeah, I don't know. I'm okay with it, but I think it's a nostalgia thing, and there's enough people there at the commentary booth to sort of cover for him. I really like Tony, and I really like Excalibur, and I really like JR, but I do think that it's sort of a nostalgia thing, because I understand that half the time he does veer towards being lost. Let's see. This is an interesting one from Luke Overstreet. Says, personally, I found myself in a place where the weekly episodic format for a wrestling show just doesn't do anything for me. The talent is great. I was a huge Kenny and Elite fan during their New Japan run. For whatever reason, though, I can't get invested in AEW because I can't shake the feeling of the underlying motivation for the majority of segments, be it AEW or WWE, is this is happening because we know where we want the story to end up, but regardless of when that happens, we still have 2 hours of weekly TV to fill until then. So that's kind of interesting. It's just Luke here has a philosophical difference with how he prefers to consume his wrestling. And we have this whole cast of characters that were in one location, one promotion, which ran basically monthly shows. And then like stories are sort of told on the road twos. And then now it's like in WWE format, basically, which is weekly format. That's just kind of interesting. I don't know. I mean, there's not really anything you can do about that. It's a weekly show. It's going to remain a weekly show, but it's still a very interesting comment here. Let's see here. This is interesting. Daniel Agosto says, I don't hate AEW. I feel like they have great matches and great superstars. I just don't like the storylines as much. Maybe I'm just too used to WWE storylines, which is a great point, because for so long, all we had was WWE's way of doing things. And now we've got it. I'm not going to say an entirely new way of doing things, but the way AEW moves along is different from WWE. And on top of that, it's still an evolving product. So I can understand how some people would just be into WWE's way of doing things. And when you switch over to something else, like if you go from a Big Mac to a Whopper, it's like, whoa, what is this? Flame grilled? That's weird. I don't dislike it. It's just different. And I'm not sure I like different. I don't know. That's an interesting point here. I'm going to wrap up with these two last ones here. Jay Fox says, most of the comments are people talking about how they love AEW. You got to know your fan base. I'm still learning the fan base, man. Apparently Wrestle Juice is all about AEW. The Enforcer says, I don't like AEW. I love AEW. And then this is a great comment right here. Zooted Beaver says the real video should be, why do people watch and like Raw? Which is a great idea for Raw. It like doubles up AEW's ratings. Now, I totally understand that. I think people underestimate the fact that WWE's had 60 years to build their brand. And so, yeah, another promotion's not just going to come around and like all of a sudden start beating it because they're new to a large amount of lapsed fans and casual fans. And so it's not like they're just going to all of a sudden start stealing in waves WWE's audience, right? There is something to be said for the habitual nature of watching a weekly show and then not giving time for something else. I get that. But what a great question with how commercially or critically bankrupt Raw has been lately over the past year, really. Why do people still watch it? Why do you guys still watch Raw? I'm going to leave this question as a community tab question, and I would like the friendos out there to answer this question. I'll look at that in a video next week because I'm really curious about it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We got some other videos over here to check out. And yeah, I got a haircut. I don't know if anybody noticed. It's fresh and clean, man. Fresh and clean. Bye.